everyone, and welcome back for part 8 of the polar bear drawing tutorial. Today we're going to be drawing in the rest of the ice that the bear is lying on. It does involve a lot of different colours, but I'll tell you every colour that I'm using as we go along, and as always I'll leave a list of them all in the description box below. I'm starting off with the Caran Primrose pencil, and I'm using it to capture the yellow highlight on this little section of ice under the paw here. Now using the Caran Raw Umber 50% pencil, I'm starting to sketch in around this section the shadows of the little bits of ice that we can see. And this is going to be a slightly more difficult process than just drawing fur, because the shapes aren't as uniform and it's not all going in one direction. And there's also quite a few different colours that are reflected in either the ice or the water, so we want to make sure we're capturing everything. So we'll just go slowly and do it bit by bit. Now I'm using the Faber Castell Warm Grey number 3, and I'll start sketching in a little more below the ice here. And I'm quickly switching back to the Primrose pencil that we used at the start, as again I'm seeing these yellow reflections come through on the water, and it's quite important to capture these at the start just so that they don't get lost when we're layering up darker colours of pencil. Now I'm back using the Warm Grey number 3, and I'm just continuing to sketch in the shapes that I can see in this section. This is the Faber Castell Cold Grey number 3 pencil that I'm using now. And there's lots of quite bright blue tones in the ice itself, so I'm using the Caran light cobalt blue pencil just to start sketching in a little bit of the blue colour. And I'm adding a little white highlight to blend in here using the Caran white. Now we need to start building up some contrast between the highlights and the shadows of the ice, as this will make the ice stand off the page a little more. So I'm using the Caran Payne's Grey 30% and adding just a few marks at the base of the ice here. And I'm also using this colour to start adding a few details to the ice itself. And then switching back to the white pencil to make sure the highlights are still coming through. And then switching back to the Payne's Grey again to continue adding the contrast between the highlights and the darker parts. Now I'm using the Primrose colour again, and this is just a really nice yellow colour to use for those yellower highlights. And I'm using this now to draw in the highlights to the right side of the ice and start working on this section now. Now I'm back to using the Payne's Grey 30%, and I'm just building up those darker layers gradually. Now I've used this pencil so much that the name is actually rubbed off, but this is the French Grey 30% Caran pencil, and I'm using it to sketch out the edges of the fur that are meeting the ice at the bottom here. And this is quite a nice warm grey tone, so I'm going to add just a hint of it to the ice section here as well, and it helps to blend everything together just to keep adding up gradual layers as we go. Now I'm switching to using the Caran white again, it's just in a pencil extender, and I'm blending the highlights at the tip of the ice section here. This section is quite blue looking, so I want to build up a bit more of that blue colour using the light cobalt blue. And you can see this area is starting to gradually form and come to life, and hopefully you can see a clear difference between the blue and darker shadows of the ice, whereas there's also sections of highlights and yellow reflecting. Now I've got the Faber Castell Cold Grey number 4, and I'm using quite a sharp point for this to start drawing in some of the dark details in this section of ice. Now I'm using the Faber Castell Ivory pencil, and this is quite a similar pencil colour to the Primrose Caran one. It's just slightly less yellow toned, and I'm just using this to fill in some of the areas of highlight in the water here. And now I'm switching back to the Caran Raw Umber 50% pencil. And I'm continuing to gradually extend the area of ice that I'm drawing. I'm paying really close attention to the reference photo because the little details here are really important to really make this area look realistic. Now there are a couple of pinkish tones that I can see, so I'm using the Faber Castell Cinnamon, and I'm adding a touch of pink here and there across this area that we're working on. With the Caran Green Ochre pencil, and you may remember that we've used this to draw the polar bear's really yellow fur, I'm using this now to sketch in some of that fur's reflection into the water here. Now I'm using the Caran Raw Umber, and I'm going to add just a tiny bit of this colour throughout where we've been working on, just to increase the depth of shadow. Now with the Caran Slate Grey, I'm going to do a similar thing but to this section of ice here. I'm just building up these shadows that we can see and making sure that they are dark enough. Now I'm switching back to the Raw Umber pencil again, and you can see this pencil has quite a green tone to it, whereas the Slate Grey had more of a bluish tone. And it's really important to be taking into account the tones of the shadows as well, which is why I'm switching between colours so much at this point. And I'm just continuing to switch between the colours that I've already mentioned, and I'm gradually building up the layers here until I have it looking how I want. Now I'm using the Faber Castell white pencil, and I'm going over the highlights with this with quite a nice sharp point. And this is a really good pencil to use when you're at the final layer that you're going to be adding to a drawing, as it will be difficult to draw over this. But it does make sure that the highlights are really well defined, and I'm also adding just a few little lines coming from the fur to make it look like the fur is overlapping the ice here. Now I've finished adding the white highlights with the Faber-Castell pencil. I want to again go back in and add some more defined lines to the shadows. So again I'm using the Caran Raw Umber, and then I'll use the Slate Grey pencil as well again. And you can see as we're increasing the shadows and increasing that contrast, the ice really is starting to come alive a bit more and look a bit more real. So even though it is quite a process and you do have to keep switching between colours and switching between adding highlights and shadows, it is really worth doing this process to get this result. Now I'm using the Green Ochre pencil again, as I feel that that yellow colour has gotten a bit lost whilst we've been layering up all the other colours. So again I'm going back in and adding a little hint of this yellow colour just here and there, mainly over the places that we added it in the beginning. Now I'm moving on to drawing in the next section of ice, just below his face, including the nice little water droplet going down. So I'm lightly sketching out all the main shapes that I can see in this area. And again, I'm just going to be following the same process, and I'll be switching between plenty of colours and just really gradually building up the layers here. I can see a little hint of green coming through in the shadows. So using the Faber Castell olive green yellowish pencil, I'm going to start gradually building those up. Now I want to add a little more definition to some areas of the shadows, so I'll use the Faber Castell Cold Grey number 4 pencil again and work my way across this area with it. And I really like how, as you add the shadows in, that the little bits of ice in the water that are floating start to appear without actually drawing anything in them. Now using the Caran Steel Grey pencil again, I'm going to start blending in some of the bluer midtones that you can see in the ice. And you can see when I'm adding these blue tones to the ice that I'm not actually filling in the whole area. I am leaving a few bits here and there looking white, as this helps make sure to prevent it looking flat on the paper. I'm also starting to sketch in the left section of ice here using the steel grey pencil. Again, I'm just sketching in where the main objects are that I can see in the reference photo. And I want to add in some of the richer dark blue tones that we're seeing in the photo. So I have the Faber Castell in Dancerine Blue, and this is one of the really pigmented colours, so you only want to use a tiny bit here and there. I'm back to using the Faber Castell Ivory pencil now, and I'll draw in the highlights towards the left hand side of the ice. And I'm switching back to drawing the shadows in using the Raw Umber pencil again. Now I'm using the Caran Raw Umber 10% pencil, and this is a great colour to add some shadows to the actual highlights of the water. It's obviously not as dark as the Raw Umber or Slate Grey pencil that we've been using for the darkest shadows, but it's great to use as a softer shadow in these really light areas, just to give that extra bit of detail to make it look really realistic in the end. Now, just like before for the first half of the ice that we did, I'm using the Faber-Castell white pencil, And again, I'm going over the areas that are the lightest in the photo and making sure that they're really clean and sharp and stand out. Now I'm using one of my favourite colours, which is the Faber Castell Juniper Green. And in the same way that we use the Indanthrene blue colour, this is another really heavily pigmented pencil to use. So we're just adding a hint here and there throughout the ice here. And you can see in the photo in the water, there are these horizontal lines that are like ripples. So I am going over these and making sure they stand out a little bit using this colour. Now I'm using the Faber Castell Caput Mortem Violet and just adding a few hints of this colour again throughout the ice. Now I'm switched back to the Raw Umber pencil again. Now that we've got all the ice pretty much sketched out and it is coming to life quite well, I can see that some areas of the water aren't quite as dark as they look in the reference photo. So I'm using the Raw Umber to add a nice layer of pencil and making sure to blend the layers that we've already put down and just gradually making some sections of the water look a little darker. And it's much better to be cautious when adding shadows because you can always go back in and make them a little darker, but it's much more difficult if you've already made them too dark and you want to make them lighter. And up until now I've been using the Raw Umber 50%, but now I've got the Caran Raw Umber, and this is to add in the darkest details that I can see in the water. And now the ice is looking really quite good, so I'm going to end the tutorial here. There is a little more ice to complete to the left hand side, but I'm going to save that for a later stage as this has taken up quite a lot of concentration. As always, thank you for drawing with me and sticking with me through such a long tutorial process. Hopefully you'll think that the results are worth it and that you're enjoying drawing with me. As always, if you have any questions, please do just drop a comment below and I'll get back to you. I've also just launched my drawing club over on Patreon, and I'd love it if you joined me there. I'll be sharing exclusive drawing tutorials to members, along with step-by-step PDF guides to make the entire process as easy as possible. I'll also be able to give you personal guidance to help you with your drawing journey. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, please do like the video and make sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on more drawing content.